to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello and welcome to the show. I am your host, Say Gabriel. And on today's episode, I am just so excited because we are interviewing somebody that we work with, our very own strategist, Jazzmine Raine, to be precise. Welcome to the show.
I am so excited to finally be on Say It Online. What an honor. Thank you very much.
So you guys may not know this, but Jazz is actually the person who oversees both the podcast and the blog. She is the person who does all of the show notes. She has listened and touched every single episode, among other things, among many other things. So I'm really excited today. This is actually the first in a 2-part series, and interviewing Jazz again. She does so much for Anansi and has so much expertise that we really wanted to get her perspective on kind of multiple different angles of writing and communicating. So this week, the focus is going to be on Jazz's experience with nonprofits, kind of that world, living abroad, what that has done to kind of affect her approach in terms of communicating and shifting her communication approaches. So really excited. We've got a lot to dig into. Not to put too much pressure on you, Jazz, but why don't we start with something relatively simple? Why don't you just start by introducing yourself, what you do for us here at Anansi, and what that looks like.
I am a senior content strategist here at Anansi Content. What that means is I get to help amazing brands and organizations connect more meaningfully with their audience community through engaging conversion copywriting. That can be everything from website content to email marketing and social media. And I also get to do that behind the scenes here at Anansi, where I actually do our social media. So that's me behind all those words on Facebook and Instagram. Well, Instagram, not yet. We're getting there. But LinkedIn and helping kind of shape the blog and all of the content for our podcast. And it's never a dull moment. I actually have way too much fun doing all of this. So maybe that makes me a bit of a nerd, but I've always been very fascinated by what the written word can do. And that's been a journey on my own as someone who didn't really necessarily have a very formal educational background in really anything, actually. I guess we'll get into that a little bit later. So it's been a beautiful journey, and I'm very happy to be on this amazing team.
Ah, yes. And we are so happy to have you. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. She oversees all of the different posts that get written, all of the topics. She does all of the organization behind the scenes. She coordinates, she reviews and edits it all. Anyway, she's a pretty special person. And that's on top of a lot of work that you do in kind of your non-work life as well. Perhaps we will touch on that today. Anyway, so... Over your experience as a strategist, you have really kind of worked your way up the ranks here at Anansi, and you've done a lot of communicating kind of writing before Anansi as well. What are some of the kind of communication issues that you've really come up against?
Well, you know what? To be completely honest, I never considered myself a great communicator, mostly because I've always been very kind of socially awkward and quirky. And I've never been very confident speaking either. And that's something that I'm finally overcoming in my mid to late 20s. So one of the things that I find that has been a hurdle, especially when I first started with you guys, was just confidence getting in the way of me being able to effectively communicate with partners, clients, even the team. I find that I repeat myself a lot because I don't really sit and fully form my sentences in my head sometimes before they actually come out, because I am a very extroverted and like silly human that I find like things just come blurting out of my mouth. And I feel like that's also become an issue with like voice and tone, especially because I work on the other side of the world. I'm based in India. So I find that I have to scale my tone quite a bit. I definitely feel like I've always kind of struggled in a very like professional setting. So kind of meeting more of that formal business voice and tone has also been a struggle for me, because I feel like I'm still like a 16-year-old living in like a 27-year-old body. So I would definitely say, yeah, just the confidence, scaling my tone to where it needs to be and being able to effectively actually communicate what I want to say. Those have been some of the biggest challenges for me. And I've noticed that, working with, entrepreneurs, digital agency owners, people who are kind of sometimes a one-person team. I've also found that I see a lot of what I'm dealing with in terms of my communication barriers. I see them reflected in a lot of the other people that I work with, which makes for a very interesting situation sometimes. But it's also helped me, understand where I can take more authority. And I think it's also helped other people who are similar in like social awkwardness as I am. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I think those are the top 3 things for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And, who would have guessed that being a nerd and getting so excited about stuff, including like words and organizations and communication, that you stumble over the things that you're saying?
Yeah.
Can't relate to that even a little bit. Not like we have a team of like 7 or 8 of those people or anything.
I think that's why I fit in so well here, right?
Right. And I know that this is a journey that one might think that as copywriters, I think that often we are coming into these meetings and we have such a clear process and we do seem so confident, but we're always our own kind of worst critics. And in our head, I think all of us to some degree, definitely even me, we're always that, awkward 16-year-old still. There's a little bit of that, no matter how far you go, I think, just waiting to come out a little bit. So, you've said that this is something that you've both observed in yourself and quite a bit in, partners kind of reflecting on similar things, clients as well. What sorts of things have you found or done over the years to really improve your communication, whether that's, with clients or partners, or even just in your own confidence level?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I think I've actually done quite a bit of work on that in the most recent years because of what I do in like the nonprofit social enterprise world. I've had a lot more opportunities to speak and to facilitate various programming. I work a lot with youth. And I found that in order for me to kind of come across as an authoritative like figure in front of like, especially like teenagers who can definitely, like teenagers intimidate me. I hate to admit that, but they totally intimidate me. And I want to make sure that I'm coming across strong, confident, engaging, and fun and relevant. And I found that, practicing, and also I have 2 teenage brothers, which makes it very helpful for practicing kind of, how to deliver workshops and events or speaking sessions at events. And so that's definitely helped. But also in general, just speaking to youth, I feel like they're although it's intimidating, they're a lot more forgiving because they're also kind of in that awkward stage. And I think that's maybe why I connect so well with them. In other ways too, I have actually a really dear friend of mine. She's actually training to become like a communication and like relationship coach. And she has basically been using me kind of like as a test subject. And for the last year, I've seen how much I've improved just because of kind of her guidance and taking examples from how she kind of asks questions to better understand things or to better communicate what she's trying to say, because again, that's something that I really struggle with. And then of course, you really getting to observe how you actively listen and learning that process from you. And you're definitely a role model when it comes to active listening. And you've definitely helped me take that next step as well. And also because like coming into, a digital job where like, I feel like this is actually a fun fact is I've actually never personally met a single person on our team, like in person, which is pretty crazy.
I forget that all the time.
Yeah, like when we finally meet, it's going to be like, what? Like, you're this short, you're this tall, you look like this. Like, it's going to be so crazy. But yeah, I think in not knowing my team in person, it's also helped me kind of step up and take on more, confidence in my role and be more observant of how the team communicates and relaying that in the way that I communicate, and also taking, what works and input and applying it to what else I'm doing in my personal and professional life.
Mm.
Yeah, I think those are probably the top things there. And honestly I think the way you communicate is so effective. That's why you run Say It Online. But I've modeled a lot of some of my speech and even like how I communicate over email and stuff based on the way that you approach things. But it's also helpful that, our voice and tone here at Anansi is not so, crazy formal, and it's fun. It's silly. We're very informal. We like to get to the point. Everything's very friendly. And as a person, that's who I am. So being part of a team that, understands and values that type of communication, and then being a person that basically communicates like that every day, it's helped me become more confident in how to communicate 100%.
I think that's, and there was actually quite a few kind of gold nuggets in there that I was, jotting down and taking note of. But even that those recent thing that you said, I think that a lot of people are very, very wedded to formality and equating formality with effectiveness in communication, whether on a conscious or subconscious level. At Anansi, over the past 4 years or so, we have worked with, especially in those early years, many, many copywriters, well over 20. And I think that's a conservative number. And I would say that was one of the single hardest habits to break, was kind of that level of formality. And even now with the clients and the partners we work with, there's this kind of attachment. Now don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you should talk to every single person in slang, right? As Jazz, you and I were talking about just this morning, tone, which is the level of formality as it is appropriate for one situation or another, is extremely important. But that being said, we are people. We are people here at Anansi, but more importantly, everybody that we work with, including the audiences that we write for, are also people. And remembering that they too are, have different things going through their heads and distractions flashing by and etc. People don't talk, especially now, with the same degree of formality that they did, 100 years ago. Read what you're writing. And I say this to anybody, right? Like when you're writing something, read it out loud. Don't be afraid to be a little bit more gentle on that. But anyway, that just caught my ear. Some of the other kind of gold nuggets that I pulled from what you were saying included, don't be afraid to seek help and, work with somebody to help you gain that kind of extra confidence in communicating and getting your point across. I heard that, you found that the different contexts of being able to express yourself and kind of find the right words applied one versus the other. So, even though I was started out by talking more in the strategist work context, you pulled all sorts of different experiences from your life, that you kind of took initiative to communicate with people. Also talking to kids and teenagers. I think teenagers, maybe if you want a more or maybe less accepting audience, I guess depends on the group. But lots of different interesting things here that you can do. So I'm really curious, you mentioned you're on the other side of the world in India. So obviously I know what you're doing there. Some of our listeners will as well. But tell us more. Why are you in India? Is that where you're from? What is the story there?
Yes, well, I am actually very much a Canadian gal. I was actually born and raised in Mississauga, but lived in Toronto for most of my adult life. But we're coming from the nonprofit side. I actually, in high school, I just decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to fighting climate change and being at that time I was wow, I'm such a hippie. But it's wow, this actually became a very conscious trend in the late 2010s. But I was very much a conscious kid about everything from I was always when I turn on my tap, why do I get water, but some people don't? When I flick my light switch on, why do I get electricity, but some people don't? That led me to go on this crazy journey understanding how I can make an impact as an individual as a community, in the community that I was living in. And that actually turned into me working in the nonprofit world because that was a thing. And I didn't know that. And that ended up turning into the social enterprise world, which that was a thing. And I didn't know that. I started a nonprofit when I was in high school, which led me to travel the world, kind of learning the ins and outs of grassroots development. And I couldn't really afford to go to post-secondary school. I couldn't really afford to go to university. I ended up going to college to study event management to learn more about fundraising and sponsorship. So actually learning to communicate as a nonprofit to people that we needed to support our initiative. So that's kind of where my first big communication, learning stream happened. I took all that experience. I went to Ghana. I came back and was working in Canada for a nonprofit, took an internship in India, and then kind of just never left India. Now I run a zero waste guest house and tourism organization. It's a social enterprise that invests 20% of profits into community development projects. And what we're focused on right now is our guest house located in Bikaner, Rajasthan, which is in North India. We actually run a community hub. So basically a safe space for young people in the community, because we live in a very traditional city. It's like a third tier city, which means that it's kind of number 3 on the development kind of scale in comparison to a tier 2 city would be something like Jaipur, if you're familiar with India. And a tier 1 city would be something like New Delhi or Bombay. So here we run a youth community hub where kids have access to everything from books, because there's actually no library here, laptops. Kids actually write their essays on their phones here, which is crazy. And then we run a series of events and workshops, everything to do with arts and culture, to environmental justice, to social justice. Sometimes we just have documentary screenings and the kids like to do spoken word nights. But it's really just about a safe space where these kids can come and communicate about, these different big, heavy topics that, especially for young women in this community, it's been amazing to have this safe space where young girls can come and talk to me about women's health and, wanting to pursue their education outside of the city and not knowing how to talk to their parents. And I didn't even realize until now how much I actually work with kids on communication until I said this out loud. But that is what we do. And of course, as a social enterprise, the way it kind of works is we have our business entity, and then we also kind of have our non-profit in quotations entity, which is the project that we do with youth. But basically the guest house funnels funds into actually keeping our programming alive. And we're currently expanding across India, which is really exciting. So my days are quite hilarious because I wake up around 8 or 9 recently. I mean, the whole summer I've been kind of waking up later because it was way too hot to do anything. And I run the guest house. I get things sorted. I, chat with travelers. I chat with our kids, get things cleaned, do some planting, do workshops. And then in the evening, I actually get on my laptop and I sit down and I start doing content. And I'm basically meeting with all of our partners and clients when it's almost my bedtime and everyone's just waking up on the other side of the world. And that's also been interesting for communication wise, because I find that some people, when they hear that I'm in India, they instantly have this crazy perspective of what is happening on my end. And I mean, I hope anyone who's asked me this question, please don't feel offended, because it's obviously, understanding India is a whole other world, literally. But when people ask me how do you have Wi-Fi or something like that? And it's, I want to be so empathetic and compassionate to these questions, but then I also think wow, how do people ask you that? But I get it. This is a completely different world on this side. A lot of people have never been to, a quote unquote developing style country. So even in I've had to learn to actually be a lot more, and this isn't actually just people that we work with, it's people even who come to the guest house and ask me crazy questions oh, you do have Wi-Fi, or I remember someone asking about smartphones, and it's so crazy because India is one of the tech capitals of the world. But it's also beautiful because I get the opportunity to practice how I want to, present and communicate India to communities that don't understand it in a very accessible and compassionate way. And I think in how I approach those communications, as well as with my business partner and staff, I've also seen the youth that we work with also become a lot more understanding when people do ask them questions, and when they do bring up topics that are shocking for people to hear. For example, menstrual health in this community is a huge topic, and there's also so much stigma around it. And when people kind of learn more about it from the kids on site, it's beautiful, but it's also, why it's beautiful is because that these kids have learned how to scale their voice and tone and like how to approach language around these topics so that they can help people understand the why before they like freak out about things. And it's allowed for our team to actually, give a lot more context and understanding to some of these big, scary topics that, most, Westerners are not used to, having because, everything is so accessible in the West. So these are, I feel like I've just ranted a lot and then I went back into communication, but that's what I do. Those are some of the things that are happening on site. and I think this just all ties into the fact that communication in the nonprofit world, regardless of where you are in the world, is you really do need to be so compassionate and again, practice active listening because, if we're constantly judging people on their questions or, what their statements that can sometimes be outrageous, there's not really any room for people to learn and grow. And I've learned that in a very beautiful way as well because my organization focuses a lot on grassroots development. Everything is bottom up and it's really about, getting our community of youth to lead the future of, sustainability in travel and sustainable development in rural and in smaller urban areas. But yeah. I think that's where I'm ending it.
Awesome. Well, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And as usual, I was kind of taking a few notes because there's a few things there that I want to kind of touch on that I think are really relevant for our audience. And first and foremost, and this is digging a little bit further back in, your experience here. But I just want to note that we work with quite a few nonprofits, and we have since the beginning. Listeners may not know this, but actually my background is also in nonprofits. And initially, Anansi was going to be a full service digital agency that served local nonprofits here where I live on the Sunshine Coast. I've been on lots of boards and served, usually sharing that communication aspect. And, obviously nonprofits work on many different levels, but we've actually worked with quite a few that are trying to make an impact in other countries. But despite the fact that so many people, want to make that impact, very few of the people we work with have actually been and traveled, around the world in this way. So, how do you find that because again, to those of our listeners who aren't aware, Jazz is kind of our nonprofit specialist of our 4 strategists, although obviously there are strategists who work on many different types of projects. Jazz tends to work with the much more in-depth nonprofit stuff. They also tend to be, larger organizations with more kind of structural challenges, and having someone with that experience specifically around, the organizational side and fundraising and et cetera has been kind of invaluable. How would you say, Jazz, that your actual experience kind of traveling and working with different nonprofits in different countries and different populations has affected the way that you approach content strategy for North American organizations?
Ooh, good question. I guess, hey, let me split it up into 2 things first. So let's think more like local community impact organizations versus international organizations. Because I think those two, there's quite a few differences in the way that we would build a content strategy and how we want to speak to the audience. And I think it also sits in in how we would also communicate in North America versus different parts of the world. The reason being is that when it's an international organization, or that could be an organization based in Canada or the US that is doing work and projects worldwide, but it could also be an organization that's for example, based in India, but their audience is in North America, which for example, even with my organization, our audience is, yes, we definitely target local travelers, but our main demographic is absolutely like millennial backpackers based in North America and Europe. So when we're approaching that content strategy, one of the biggest things that needs to actually be considered is obviously understanding who the ideal customer is, because that's huge. And that's going to change everything to do with your voice and tone. But nailing your voice as a nonprofit is so important because, and why that is because you can have an extremely clear and effective elevator pitch or, just messaging about exactly what you do and what you offer and what projects you have, etc. But if you don't have a strong organizational personality, it's so easy for people to disengage because there are so many nonprofits. And most likely there's always going to be a nonprofit that's doing something similar to what you're doing. And how you differentiate yourself is obviously finding the things that are super unique about you, but your voice is so critical. And I'm going to give you an example. So imagine, you're at home watching the television and you see I hate to name drop, but one of those World Vision ads come on the TV and it's very sappy and there's sad music and, the images are all oh, poor African children. And, there's a narrator who's making you feel all the feels. And I won't lie, I cry all the time for infomercials and promotional videos, especially for nonprofits. Very emotional girl on this end. But,
I feel you so hard. I'm there too. Keep going.
Yeah. I think one time I got teary watching a Sheridan promo video and I was like, what is going on? This is a lame hotel chain and I'm getting upset. But anyways, another topic for another day. But, you see this commercial come on the television. Instantly, it evokes an emotion. You connect with it on a very intimate level because obviously no human being wants to see another human being suffering. And, they use this kind of caregiving, nurturing approach. But also kind of, making you feel like you're the hero and being you can change this situation for these youth by, donating $1 a day or something like that. And not that that's if that works for them, yes, it's definitely not going to get them a strong long-term audience, especially in this day and age, because that might have worked 10 years ago. But, I think, over the last 10 years, people have really educated themselves on understanding, or looking into the transparency of organizations. That might be a little bit too broad for me to say that, but I think for the most part, most people, look into understanding the impact of an organization before they start to give their money out. Whereas, so let's say we have that example, and then imagine if we had the same commercial and we took more of my favorite archetype is the outlaw. That's also the very, very Hada House brand archetype.
I also, sorry to interrupt you too, but I just want to note that the voice, the brand archetype that you described that World Vision uses is a good example of the beloved as well as potentially the innocent. The beloved, which is inviting you to share in an intimate moment, even if that intimate moment is potentially a sad one. And the innocent, which is, hearkening to kind of simpler joys and simpler times, perhaps. No, I think it's a little bit more the beloved. Anyway, please keep going.
Yeah, 100%. I think We Lovin Works really well as well because it is very much connecting with you on a very intimate level that, and especially because that audience for that commercial, for example, would most likely be at-home moms. So they feel that connection instantly. They're like, oh my gosh, I would hate to see my own child going through that. So of course I'm going to donate. So yeah, that's actually an even better example. And then imagine if we took that same commercial and we change up the voice to the outlaw. So it's all about helping people kind of break the status quo and make a difference and change it up and, kind of make history with what they're about to do. And even if we just have that one brand archetype and we use that type of voice for this commercial and we change the imagery and we actually showed these kids thriving and it was all about these kids have these opportunities because you have impacted their lives through your, such and such donation or, your volunteering or etc. And it's like, imagine how much more you could do for these young kids if you did A, B, C, and D. Like, contact us today. Like, that's a very lame overview. But that to me sounds much more positive, much more exciting. It makes me feel like, oh my goodness, I am part of the change that these kids are going through, instead of me being like, oh my goodness, I need to donate because these kids are hungry. And another thing why that's so powerful is because if we were going to now an organization on a local level, I think people don't even realize how many people in our own communities are starving and don't have access to the resources they need to live a healthy life. And if they use that same commercial, that sappy, sad, beloved, caregiving kind of commercial in, let's say in Toronto, and they use, and they're portraying images of, homeless youth or adults in the Toronto area, I don't think it would have the same effect. But if they took even that outlaw view as well into that context, and it was all about, providing opportunity and helping people get on their feet again within the Toronto community, that's going to help people, see the benefit of like, okay, if we help these people get up on their feet, it just contributes to more of, us contributing to our local economy and our society. And it's all about empowerment. And that's kind of why that message can be so powerful when it's like on a local level. And that's why I say, like, yes, the outlaw kind of voice could have definitely worked for those World Vision commercials. The beloved worked well because it's a connection that people are making that they actually have never had. So it's like, for example, that stay-at-home mom is seeing that commercial. They're connecting to it because they have kids and they would never want to see their kids hungry. And also, they have painted their own perspective of what, any country in Africa looks like, because to most people, Africa is just a country and not a continent. But that's another conversation for another day. I had to plug that. But, that's how they've been able to achieve, the progress that they've had to date. Not that being said, I'm not vouching for World Vision, and that I think that's another topic for another day. But I think that's kind of an example of, how you can kind of pull at the heartstrings, because there's always going to be an emotional aspect when it's a nonprofit. Absolutely. And that's actually what makes it so beautiful, is that people can really connect to these issues that they know are going to either, better social, economic, or environmental situations, sometimes even political situations. So I think, it's really about understanding who your audience is and choosing, a really powerful voice.
Yeah.
Because, I think those are just like the two key things based on those made up examples that I just gave.
Thank you. I think those were actually really, really clear examples. And thank you for kind of summing it up so succinctly. Something that really stood out for me, I've been doing a lot of dipping. A lot of people have been speaking to us about the story brand framework for basically years. And I've only fully been kind of immersing myself now. And one of the things that they really talk about, and they frame so succinctly, is that the audience is always the hero of a story that you're inviting them into. And the organization is always the guide, right? And what I'm hearing in the World Vision example is that you're inviting them to be the hero to come in and save. But, for some audiences, that's going to work more successfully. Whereas for other audiences, it's not. Also, the voice is kind of a way to just position what that help looks like and how you're kind of coming in. Another gold nugget I pulled from that was really approaching people internationally, different from how you approach people locally, even how you just kind of defined kind of different, define not just nonprofits as an umbrella term, but there are a lot of different nonprofits. As you said, they operate on different levels with different scales. They operate at different places in kind of the stages of user awareness, which is, how aware is somebody of their problem and, your product, service, organization, et cetera's ability to help them solve it, right? Again, you are the guide who is helping them get to that success story. And of course, this is something that we talk about all the time as copy experts, is really engaging people on that emotional level without overwhelming them. Anyway, Jazz, we could really keep talking about this. I mean, we didn't even talk about, the work that you do for like cause artists or other stuff. There is definitely lots that we could talk about, but I know that you have a lot to do, and as do I. I want to respect your time here. So I want to kind of start to wind us down with maybe a few quick questions. How are you feeling about a few quick lightning round questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, so quick questions. So what is the number one thing that gets you up in the morning?
My immediate answer was coffee, but that's not it. I feel like I'm going to give the cheesiest answer, especially for someone coming in a nonprofit, but to make somebody smile.
Ooh, you make me smile every day that we talk, which is almost every day.
I love you. Am I allowed to say that on the podcast?
Yes. This is how you know that we are, you can kind of see our culture behind the scenes a little bit more at Nancy. We're definitely a very technically.
Yeah, we're giving it all away in these podcast episodes.
All right, quick question. What is the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness?
I like to do like those unconscious streams of writing in a journal where you just kind of, you never put the pen down. I think that's what they're called, unconscious stream.
I call them stream of consciousness, but I don't know if that's...
Stream of consciousness, that's it. I'm like, it's clearly 10:30 p.m. in India, and I'm like, what is that called? Yeah, stream of consciousness, where I'm just basically going, and I like to get everything out, and it feels great. And then have a cup of chai.
And last question, what is the weirdest habit that you have that contributes to your success?
My weirdest habit. These are great questions.
Thank you. I haven't asked them for a few interviews now.
They're great. And what is my weirdest habit? I'm like looking around my space and I'm like, what do I do that's odd? I don't want to say something embarrassing and then regret it later when everyone hears
it. I braid my hair while I talk and like knot my hair. That's my weird habit. It contributes to my success. It helps me think.
Yeah, and actually, I've noticed that you do that, and I love it. I think my thing is actually that I play with my nose ring, which is so awkward because most people think like I have my finger in my nose, but really I'm just like deep in thought playing with my nose ring, and it looks awful.
Yes, I think these are habits that like evolve from working like at home alone a lot of the time. I think I know that's where my habits are, especially like 100%. We are copywriters, right? Like it seems like we're always like on interviewing, talking, doing meetings, etc. But even myself, although I occupy these days primarily a leadership role, I'm not in the weeds with projects or sales anymore. I do spend a lot of time deep in thought alone at my computer just working on stuff, and I think that's where these habits evolve for me. So
yeah, I'm pretty enclosed in my space once I'm on my computer, so it makes sense that I'm doing weird things. I also sing a lot to myself.
I sing a lot too.
Yeah, but what's great is that because I live in the guest house that I run, so sometimes I'll like hear somebody join in, like in another room, somebody will start like harmonizing with me, and then like next thing I know, I'm like not working anymore because I'm out like performing a musical in the hallway. So you'll be here soon, Faye. Don't worry.
Yes, I can't wait. I will admit that something similar kind of does happen in my life, less while I'm working, more in my personal life, because my husband's usually at work while I'm working. But he's a big musician, and he'll often be playing music, and I'm the person who starts singing along from the next room.
Amazing.
Oh, yes, our wonderful musical lives on the other side of the world. Anyway, so this has been lovely. Yeah, I look forward to next. So tune in, guys, if you're interested. So this week we talked a little bit more about nonprofits, how to talk to nonprofits, communicate, develop effective messaging. Next, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is equally relevant. I know many of our listeners do work with nonprofits. Some of you guys may not, but I do know that every single one of you has to market your own business. Some of you guys are maybe super successful at it. Some of you guys are maybe not doing as much as, say, you're doing for clients or as you'd like to be. Maybe. Not that I relate to that at all. Anyway, we've done some really cool transitioning in the past year to what we're calling a decentralization of leadership, where, the marketing team was me for a long time, just kind of doing whatever. And we did a lot of direct outreach. And now we've been doing this kind of big shift from more outbound to more inbound, although there's always a mix there. Shifting marketing from being one person to being kind of a team and what that looks like, starting to formalize it, starting to do more ongoing content. And we're going to hear a lot about Jazz's perspective going from, perhaps more appropriate would be to say switching back and forth from writing marketing collateral for other businesses and then writing, for a Nancy as well as for the other businesses that she herself runs. So really, really excited to tune in with Jazz on that. We have a new episode every Friday. And look forward to sharing it with you. Until then, have an excellent day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.